Good morning, Joanna. How you doing? Good.
Good morning, Joel. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm
Good
really
to see
well,
you.
thank you. How you
Good.
doing?
I'm blessed, always, in always. All the better for talking to you, though. There is another book, Joanna.
That's
Um,
right.
Another book, Bright Stars and Black British History. Let me see if I can, we hold it up at the same time
Yeah, we
again.
could.
um, Brilliant. My copy came recently. I've had a quick peruse. Before I get into, my immediate thoughts, talk us through a little bit about what this book is about. And where did you find the time to do this in and amongst all your projects?
So it's funny because, to be honest, I think I'd already started work on this book when I first spoke to you. So when we first met online in 2020, this book was already, obviously like COVID and that whole sort of period of time put a pause on a lot of things. But actually, this was like my first commission. So this book was actually commissioned before I wrote the Lizzie and Bell Mysteries, the books that I spoke to you about last year. And I'd had an idea. I'd been hatching with a friend, actually, Angela Vives, who's the illustrator of the book. And we had initially been talking about a picture book biography of Ignatius Sancho. So I've spoken to you about him before, the 18th century black abolitionist who was living in London, writing letters. And I was running workshops about him, and Angela was doing a master's in children's illustration and with a focus on picture book biographies for children, a way of bringing lives to light, if you like, for our younger readers. So we about creating a picture book about him. I actually wrote a poem at the time, his life story, sort of in verse, and Angela illustrated it. And we took it to Thames and Hudson. We met with the children's commissioning editor there, Anna Ridley. And things went back and forth for a while. And then Anna came back and said, actually, would you be interested in doing something broader and including more people in, say, like an anthology of biographies? And I was like, absolutely. As you know, I'm a teacher. I used to be a primary school teacher. And I think when we had our first conversation in 2020, at that point, I'd written a piece about my mum, and I was thinking about her as a nurse and her sort of contribution. She came here from Sierra Leone in 1960. But over the course of my working life, through sort of teaching, running creative writing workshops, running research workshops, I just thought there are so many people who I feel our young people should know about, whether it's through the classroom or reading at home with their families. So we wanted to create a book that would sort of bring families together, if you like, around these stories, because there are so many extraordinary men and women who have made such a brilliant contribution to our history. And I really love the idea of life stories. I'm really interested in sort of the sort of journey of someone's life, the decisions they make, why they sort of choose to go in certain directions, the obstacles they have to overcome. It's always sort of inspiring to see what people have overcome. And so that's what I've done. I've brought these 14 different life stories together, right back from the Tudor age, John Blank, the African Tudor trumpeter at the court of Henry VII and Henry VIII, right up to Claudia Jones, who effectively founded the street carnival that would go on to become Notting Hill Carnival for us.
Yeah, it's very encompassing in terms of the periods that you're looking at. I was immediately struck by the fact that I could just par this off to my son, and there was, an immediate point of interest in there with Walter Tarland, my son's interest in
Yeah.
football. So that gives him a reason to just dive in straight away from an area that he loves and go from there. And the same for my daughter, actually, who's a little bit younger, but I can definitely see how this is going to serve her. I found myself thinking this is going to be great for the kids, but then when I was reading it, thinking, no, this is for everyone, isn't it? Talk
I'm
about that.
really glad you say that. Yeah, I hope so, because I just think, again, for all of us, these are stories that, depending on who we are, what our connections are, still so much of sort of the information around of these people has sort of been a bit hidden for a while, or the stories have been out there, but they've not often been in the public domain. And I just wanted to find a way of bringing all of these stories together and really shining a light on them. And especially when you realize, I think when you do sort of look at them alongside each other and you realize the extent to which people have sort of endured and achieved in so many different fields, and often sort of been fighting a lot of the same battles actually over time. Like, one thing that really struck me about people's journeys were the similarities and the connections in the struggles, but also I think even though the book sort of tries to illuminate individual peoples, we've got like musicians like Samuel Coleridge Taylor, some more familiar names, perhaps like Mary Seacole, looking at her journey. But I suppose like trying to find all of these points in common, the ways in which actually they've made such a significant contribution to our history. And with someone like Walter Tull, for example, and I'm waiting for a big film to come out about Walter Tull, because I think he was like such an extraordinary person. And I say extraordinary, but in many ways, you know, sort of lived an ordinary life. But, you know, his father actually came to England from Barbados via St. Lucia. And Walter's grandparents had been enslaved, like they had lived through slavery. And Walter's father took himself off across the world and actually settled in Kent, of all places, settled in Folkestone, married an English woman. And there was a lot of family tragedy early on in Walter's life. His mum died young, his father died young, and actually Walter and his brother Edward found themselves in care. They were sent to the National Children's Home in Bethnal Green. And again, I just thought, you know, this young man actually had so many trials early on in his life, but started playing football actually, you know, in that orphanage, and was spotted early on, became a rising star, a talent, went on to play national football. Actually went to fight in the First World War, lost his life young. But I just thought actually there are so many points of connection with that story that I hope that will sort of resonate, if you like, with young people today, so that they can find inspiration. And I think we still have to really keep pushing to bring these stories to the front, you know. Yeah.
No, agreed. You cover so much stuff that's, you know, looking back and represent it in a way that's palatable for an audience, you know, to kind of learn as easily as possible today. I wonder what part of this book was the most, I guess, like, what was it? Was there a light bulb moment for you, or what was the point where you thought, oh, I didn't know that, or the most intriguing element of unearthing all this information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there are many answers. I mean, again, like, you know, I said, some of these people, it's almost like some of them we might have already heard about them, you know, Mary Seacole, Harold Moody. But there are these sort of moments, say, for example, like Mary Seacole. I'd always known that, you know, she'd gone to the Crimea, that she was this amazing sort of, you know, medicine woman with these incredible skills. But things like, you know, she was the first person who sort of understood that one of the ways to prevent the spread of infection was to keep windows open, to keep fresh air circulating through her wards. Now, that may sound like such an obvious thing for us today. I feel like she's never really sort of taken credit for sort of bringing that, if you like, into our health system. And also that she funded her own trip to the Crimea. She had been making and selling beautiful preserves and pickles and condiments and medicines. And she paid for her trip to the Crimea. She paid for the setting up of the hospital that she worked in out there. So again, for me, that was so inspiring in terms of, you know, the determination and the grit that it must have taken, having been turned down, as it happens, you know, by Florence Nightingale when she wanted to sort of join that trip, to actually think, do you know what, I'm going to do this off my own steam. And not only did she sort of serve in this sense of looking after all those men and women out there, but she paid to do so. And I just thought, how extraordinary that this woman felt so committed to her own cause that she should do such a thing. Dr. Harold Moody, he came from Kingston, Jamaica, trained as a doctor, was a real high flyer, but was refused work in London hospitals when he started applying for jobs. And so just thought, you know what, I'm going to set up a practice in my own home in Peckham. And that's what he did. He and his wife, this is, you know, decades before the setting up of the NHS, they established their home not just as a community sort of doctor's surgery, but also as a kind of home of refuge and advice to people arriving from the Caribbean or from Africa into London, people who needed advice on housing. He advised on employment. He really fought for people's rights on so many levels. And one of the things that often strikes me about Harold Moody, so Tony Warner, who runs Black History Walks, always does an interesting introduction to the story of Harold Moody, where he introduces this idea of a man who is a preacher, a doctor, a civil rights activist. Who might we be talking about? And inevitably, people think of Dr. Martin Luther King. But for me, the key thing about all of this is that we have these figures in our own past. We have these people who've been doing this work for us in Britain. And yet still, we're I think we're at a tipping point now. I think it's beginning to change, but people are still more familiar with those African-American figures, with that history, when we've got this history right here in our own country and our own people that we need to be celebrating and centering in our consciousness, in our sort of memories.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. How's the journey been, Jay? It's been a couple of years, isn't it? You are a fully fledged author now and in the business and busy. Yeah. How's it feel?
It's amazing, actually. And, you know, because I wanted to do this for such a long time. And now I feel like this is it. I mean, this is just what I'm going to do for the rest of my life now. I write every day. I'm doing research every day. And I do feel genuinely really blessed, really fortunate to have the opportunity to do this and to have the platform as well. So on the one hand, I feel like it's a massive privilege, but obviously it's a responsibility as well, because now I've got this space, and my thanks to you, because you have followed me the whole way, haven't you, from the very beginning, you know, and supported me and given me this space as well in which to speak. But I do take that with a very strong sense of responsibility as to what I'm going to do with that. So again, you know, whether it's sort of one person at a time, one story at a time, I do feel absolutely now committed to this life's work of shining a light on all of these amazing people in our past who have helped us to get to where we are.
You've done some amazing work, some stellar work that is deserving of this platform. So as long as we can support you, we will. I guess I want to be a bit cheeky then and find out if you got another 14 names for the next one in the pipeline. You know what I'm like? They always push you. But I can imagine there's probably a short list of names that you haven't got, that weren't ready for this book. You probably had enough. So how does the next version look, or the next iteration of this Bright Stars Black British History series? Yeah. I'm calling it a series, even though you never told me it was a series.
I know. So I mean, this was sort of like 4 years in the making, effectively. And at the moment, I'll be honest, I'm actually working on some fiction for adults at the minute. So, you know, I've went back to uni, as you know. I'm sort of doing a creative writing course, and I'm looking still at history. There are 2 novels in particular that I'm working on for adults that I hope to complete over the next couple of years. So that's where my focus is now in terms of my writing. One of those is really looking at, again, the history of Black lives in this country, but over time. So again, sort of going back to the 18th century, 19th century, and really thinking about writing and who was getting to tell our stories at that time. The other book that I'm working on is looking at a family history. So one of the figures in this book actually is Evelyn Dove, who was a singer. She sang with the first band to bring jazz. I'm a huge jazz fan. But the Southern Syncopated Orchestra for a long time were not credited really as the first band to bring jazz from the US to the UK, and often that the credit had gone to an all-white band, or a mainly white band, called the original Dixieland Jazz Band. But it was a Southern Syncopated Orchestra made up of like Caribbean, African-American, West African musicians. And Evelyn Dove sang with that band. And she actually, I discovered in lockdown, she was actually my great aunt. I'm a member of the very, very extensive Dove family. So the other novel that I'm working on is looking at this incredible history, actually, at the beginning of the 20th century, First World War, all of those Black men actually that fought on Britain's behalf in World War I, looking at the 1920s as well, the jazz scene in Soho. We had artists, we had writers, we had musicians living and working here. And again, that's something I feel that still hasn't kind of like come to the surface in terms of what we see out there in TV, in film. But I'm writing a novel to honour those people at the moment too.
You mentioned TV and film. As you're breaking it down, I can just see it as a cinematic movie, Netflix, Apple TV,
Yeah, I hope
Spotify,
so.
just to quote them
Yeah.
all. But I could see it as a series. So do you write with that in mind, or are you purely just focused on the text?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So actually, really consciously, I love the work of writing novels, like fiction. I feel that is where my heart sort of like lies. Certainly with the work for adults, I'm really thinking about writing novels. I think obviously in a very visual way. So the way that the novels work for me, I feel like it's almost like you're imagining, aren't you? Having to sort of play out the film of that work in your mind in order then to write it.
Mm.
And so it is always a very visual process for me in that sense. And ultimately, I know that if you want to reach lots of different audiences in lots of different ways, you do have to think really flexibly about how they're going to come to these stories. And I feel that these stories should be out there on the small screen, on the big screen. So yeah, for me, a step would be if I were to write these books and get them out there in that form, then hopefully I would hope that someone would pick those up and look at how we could adapt that work for the big screen. But for all of us, there are so many different stories that we need to get out there. And if there's one thing I could say, to your readers and your listeners, it's just to sort of keep remembering, never let anyone in the industry tell us that that's already sort of covered. I think for a long time it really felt with Black talent that there was only allowed to be like one of us in one space at any one time, and it's like, no, there is like room for all of us. There are so many stories that we need to get out there, and so yeah, we just have to just keep them coming in as many forms as possible.
Joanna, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate your time as
Always a
usual.
pleasure to talk to you,
Bright
John.
Stars and Black British History People is out. Get your copy, and I'm sure JT Williams is going to be busy over the next few years, so you might want to kind of make a note of her name. She's not going anywhere soon, right? Is there anything else you want to share with us before you part ways?
Yes, I will. Can I give a heads up for an event that
Go
I'm
for it.
doing
Go.
with
You go.
with
Promote. Flag away.
with BMT, a bookends event on National Storytelling Day, which is Thursday, the 1st of February. So that is coming up soon. That's in central London. And one of the things, the whole kind of day planned of fantastic book related events being arranged by Fusion, who's a really sort of inspirational speaker, educator, writer, and he's bringing together myself and Angela, the illustrator, and other authors to talk about our books. So that is, if you're on socials, then check out BMT events, basically inspirational Black stories. So that's coming up. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that.
And where can people find you, Jay?
So I'm on JT Williams Writes on Insta. I'm on X as I've still got my sort of my actual name, which is Joanna Brown. So I'm easily findable there. And there's information about all the books there, links to buying the books as well. So yeah, do sort of look me up and have a look at the other work that I've been doing.